Welcome to Season 3 of Under the Sisterhood, Women Making the World Healthier. We'll be featuring a series on investing in women's health, showcasing 5 powerhouse investors and venture capitalists over the next 5 weeks. Our conversations will focus on many different aspects of women's health and wellness. We'll examine women's health in general, sexual health, reproductive health, and menopause, and what it means to invest in them. This is a podcast to celebrate women and all that they do in our world. I'm Elizabeth Elfenbein. Let's get under the hood. Today we're getting under the hood with Linda Greub, a mother, daughter, sister, friend, women's advocate, and the co-founder and managing partner of Avestria Ventures. For over 30 years, Linda has invested in public and private life science companies as an institutional investor, a corporate M&A executive, a hedge fund analyst, and a private venture investor. She's held roles at companies such as Essex Investment Management, Bank of America Securities, Novartis Diagnostics, Applied Biosystems, sold to Life Technologies Corp, as well as venture-backed life science companies such as VitaPath Genetics, Singulex Raindance Technologies, sold to Bio-Rad, and Linkage Biosciences, sold to Thermo Fisher. In 2010, Linda started angel investing with 2 of her Harvard Business School classmates, focusing on female-founded startups. One of the companies in their portfolio was nVision, a female-founded women's health-focused startup that was acquired by Boston Scientific in 2018 for up to $275 million. Trouble that nVision had fundraising from the male-dominant venture capital industry and its subsequent success nonetheless led Linda and one of her fellow angel investors to found Avestria Ventures in 2019 to focus exclusively on early-stage women's health and female-led life science ventures. Linda's area of expertise include finance, operations, and merger, as well as the life sciences, specifically diagnostics, genomics, healthcare services, and life science tools. Linda received her BA from Yale University and her MBA from Harvard Business School. You know, in reading your introduction, I think your story is amazing. Just as a woman investor, wow. I mean, just to survive in that sort of environment, but then to be healthcare focused, it would be really wonderful to understand, like, what was your journey like?
I was actually a history of art major undergrad. I was not a pre-med and I was not a scientist. And I got a job after college on Wall Street. And then after business school, I went into the investment management community. And they often break their investment teams into industry specifics. And for no good reason, they said, "You're smart, you do healthcare," to me. And so I just started covering companies that were in the healthcare and life science space and just boldly asked ignorant questions and slowly started learning a tiny bit about all the different, very complicated areas of healthcare and life sciences.
As you embarked on that journey in healthcare, like, what was it like being on the investment side, and what was your learning process like?
Well, I got very used to being the most ignorant person in the room. And maybe I wasn't always the most ignorant person in the room, but I realized I had a very steep learning curve. And even today, I have a very steep learning curve. I mean, the wonderful thing is your brain has to always stay sharp. You have to try to follow conversations where you maybe don't know what the heck they're saying, and you're picking up every 5th word. And it's an awful lot of then being willing to ask a question and to make yourself vulnerable in front of your peers when you're asking a question of a management team or a senior scientist, and then being willing to go back and try to fill in the blanks on the things you don't know. You're talking to people who are absolute experts in their field, and there is no way you could be at the same level they are. You just have to get comfortable with that uncertainty.
So you're sitting in these rooms with these scientists and you're learning, and you're learning also the business side of investing. And clearly, as a founder of a venture capitalist firm today, you had to have some sense, moving forward, of the intersection of the two. What was that like for you?
Maybe what was helpful to me is that I always did fall back on the business piece. Because, I could struggle all day to learn the science, and a lot of it is really, gee whiz, incredible science. But I think what was helpful was that the back of my mind, I always think, is this a company that can make money? Right? Is this going to be a product that people will want, that they'll pay for? At the end of the day, no matter how sexy biotech is, it's still a business. And it's all about, is there demand and what can people pay for?
I mean, you worked at some interesting companies working on interesting, like to become a sort of an expert in the life science and genomics. Talk about your journey. And then what was it like as well as a woman, Linda?
On the one hand, I was always aware of being a woman because, especially especially I worked in the hedge fund community, which has been very dominated by men. And I got involved in all of this in the late 80s, and it was still very much a macho culture. When I went to business school, I think it was about 23% females. It just made me very much aware that I was a bit of an other. And my response was basically to hide all the more human aspects of myself. And luckily, I think the current generations and where we are today, we're actually embracing the fact that women are different. Actually, each one of us is different from each other, but women have certain differences in general in terms of how they show up in the workplace than men do. And I think I just try to hold that part of myself back and sort of be somewhat more one-dimensional in the younger parts of my career. And luckily, I don't think that's as necessary anymore. But even then, I mean, I work at an organization, we happen to all be women, we know each other very well. I'm sure that there are still many organizations where it's extremely difficult to be a woman.
I can relate to being in a male-dominated environment and industry and really having to be one-dimensional. I wanted to be valued and evaluated based on meritocracy. And it's really tricky. I think in your industry, at least you were valued. My industry was subjective, but your industry is about making money. So it's very measurable. Were there any moments in that journey where you did all the investment banking, the hedge funds? Like what was sort of your experience like in terms of, wow, I'm finding not just enjoyment, this is really interesting to me. What got you, was there an inflection moment that you got excited about?
I loved business school. Many people don't. I loved the fact that every day we would look at maybe 3 completely different businesses, and they were all like puzzles, like what is the problem they're facing? What are their options for how they could solve this? So what was interesting to me is that when I was sorting out jobs after business school, I found that investment management was very much the same way, because if you're investing in publicly traded companies or private, you have to you have to very quickly get up to speed on a completely unique business, and you have to understand their dynamics of the industry. You have to understand what competition is there, and again, it's like a puzzle. You have to figure out, like, sort of what are the key things in the environment and that the company itself that are going to make it or break it. So first you're sort of boiling down the ocean, figuring out what the key levers are, and then trying to hone in on those. So I love that. I mean, it's so intellectually challenging, and it was just a wonderful job to be able to sit down as a young person with all sorts of very experienced CEOs and talk to them about their businesses and, what their challenges were, what they were excited about, where they thought the industry and their company was going. So in that sense, it was really a dream job.
As you moved forward in your career, I almost want to bring up the unmet needs as sort of as an inflection point, because what got you from hedge fund to investment, like and now venture capitalism? Talk a little bit about your story that got you out of more of the investment group into the VC group, and then of course to Avestria.
After over 10 years of investing in publicly traded companies, I was excellent at earnings calls and looking at cash flow statements and income statements and balance sheets. I really didn't know what it was like to work at an operating company. I mean, I could tell you that if your accounts receivable is too high, that's a problem. But it didn't really mean anything to me. Like, I had no sense for an account receivable means somebody owes the company money, and how are they going to get the money paid? And, and often at the time it was, if the customer was in Italy, they tended to pay later than a customer who was in Switzerland, right? I didn't know any of that. And I just, again, realizing how ignorant I was, I thought, I really need to go work at an operating company so I have a better understanding that companies are more than just their balance sheet and income statement. And so that's why I got a job at a company called Applied Biosystems. And it was in the very late 90s, early aughts. And Applied Biosystems makes gene sequencers. And so it was when they were mapping the human genome. And our sister company, Celera, was actually doing the mapping, and we were making the instruments that enabled that. And that was such an exciting time. We take it all for granted now, right? I mean, when 9/11 happened, that was probably the first time where DNA was really, analyzing DNA to identify people. Became very public in terms of the benefit of that in certain situations. And I know our company flew instruments out to Manhattan to help identify human remains. So, again, we take DNA, DNA is on every TV show today, but back then it wasn't the same. We were just figuring it out, and it was so exciting.
So going in as an investor, like as a financial person with that sort of mindset and seeing the operational side, what was that like for you?
It was frustrating. In ways, sometimes I felt like, a Porsche driving on slow city streets. And just because I had been trained, first of all, in the hedge fund community, you make really quick decisions, which isn't always good, but you have to. Corporate America moves at a much slower pace. When I was working on Wall Street, I was really paid to have an opinion. And especially, that is what people cared about. That didn't mean they always agreed with me, but they wanted to hear my opinion. Moving in corporate America, people did not want to hear my opinion, or they did, but only, your opportunity to say something was limited, and you really had to pick your time and your place for when you could say something in order to really impact the conversation and move things in a certain direction. So that was hard for me. Basically, I guess it was learning how to be politic, right? Learning that, I needed to keep my mouth shut. And that was very hard for me. And the pace is just very different at an operating company. Now, Applied Biosystems at the time was publicly traded and had hundreds of millions in revenue, so it wasn't a startup. I know that, if you're at a private startup, it's a very different aspect. But Wall Street to Main Street was very difficult in that sense. And I was lucky, though, because the people I was working with were so smart and so cutting edge that element was still very much in play.
Was there any correlation between being a woman in either one of those environments? I mean, I think once you get into Wall Street and you're doing it and you have a voice and they respect you.
Wall Street is a meritocracy and that the numbers speak for themselves. And to be honest, that's naive. It's your ability to catch the ear of another investor. It's your ability to influence other investors. It's your ability to, when you truly believe an investment should be made, that you can display that confidence that people may be approaching you with skepticism. So I would like it to believe that Wall Street is a meritocracy, or was, but in truth, it's not. I had already reached that point when I moved into corporate America. So I realized already that things were more complicated than I expected. But what was wonderful about Applied Biosystems was, even though the senior management were all males, there were the next layer of management was uniquely heavily female dominated. And that's, one of the things in molecular biology for a long time, if you look at the number of PhDs in molecular biology, women have been right up there as sort of an equal participant. And one time someone explained to me that the reason why is because a lot of what we think about with genetics really started in the context of pregnancy. When did we first care about knowing if we had certain genes? It had to do with carrier screening for unborn children. So that's been one of the reasons I've been told that there are many female PhDs in molecular biology, and we've had Nobel Prize winners, a number of women in the field. So I think I think ABI, or Applied Biosystems, was somewhat unique because of the field that they were in. So there were many women there who I think were amazing people and were great leaders.
Now I'd like this next stage to talk about what got you into venture capitalism.
So I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, so we all have stars in our eyes about startups right here, right? And we all ignore the risks and just think about the reward, right? And the reward could be financial, but it's also the idea of potentially changing the world a little bit. So there was a time after I left Applied Biosystems, and I worked at a series of venture capital backed startups. And I love the fact that, you the first thing you do is figure out, I mean, luckily now we have remote as an option, but back when we started, we had to find office space, right? We had to find a table to sit down and work at. And that was such a different experience for me, how do you create something out of nothing? So that was wonderful. And to be honest, I've always wanted to start my own company. Once I got into venture capital backed startups, I kept thinking, okay, so I need to find the big idea where I can be the founder. And I started realizing that in healthcare, the people who are business people may not be likely to come up with the big idea. They're often great at finding the scientist who has the great idea and championing them and forming it into a business. So I was always looking for the person and the great idea. And I will say that along the line, I realized that what comes naturally to me is the investing part. In my sleep, I can analyze companies and thinking about how to grow them and thinking about the different stages of a business. And that's different from in your sleep thinking about, microRNAs and, and could you use CRISPR to, as a probe for RNAs, right? So I think that I had to become honest with myself about where my real strength was. And I don't think I would ever start an operating company. And so that started bringing me back to investing. And at the time, I was in charge of mergers and acquisitions at Novartis Diagnostics. And one of my business school classmates, Corinne Navini, who'd been incredibly successful in healthcare, approached me and she said, I'm stepping away from the corporate world. I'm really interested in venture capital. Nobody will hire me. So what do you say we start our own beta fund and we'll see how it goes. And if it's successful, maybe we can start our own fund. And so she reached out to another friend, Margot Shapiro from business school. And so the three of us, and Corinne was absolutely, the driver of it. And I said, well, I'm not quitting my day job, but I can help. And so we started doing that in 2010. And we were remarkably successful. I mean, we took $2 million and turned it into $8 million over a period of 7 years. And what all three of us were struck by was that less than 2% of venture capital dollars goes to female founders. And that has not changed in 3 decades. And I look at women, I looked at my business school classmates, I look at the women coming out of business school today, and that makes no sense that they would not be being funded. I mean, it would be one thing if we were talking, 45 versus 55, but 2% versus 98%, it just makes no sense. So we invested in 8 companies and they all had female founders, but they were in different industries. And one of the things I learned through that experience is I can only do healthcare. Healthcare is complicated enough, and every company will hit a bump in the road at some point. And you as a venture capitalist, you are limited in your ability to help them by your own networks and your own skill set. So if it was anything out of healthcare, I really couldn't be helpful to the companies. And that was a key learning for me in that experience.
I mean that makes total sense. I mean, I feel like, and we haven't gotten there yet, but the notion of women's health and supporting this such underserved area or industry, if you will, is just amazing. So I think it's great that you recognize that. Talk about that experience and what it's been like.
When we started Avestria, we had been investing our own money and invested in a young woman who, Surbi Sarna, the CEO of nVision. And when she went out to raise her Series B, she was consistently told by venture capitalists, and this was 2017, and 95% of all venture capitalists at the time were men. And she was consistently told that women's health was a niche business. She was able to raise her Series B from a female venture capitalist, and she sold the company a year later. So we had a great proof point. But I myself started thinking, why do people think women's health is a niche business? And why do I myself sort of get a sense that it's a niche business? And that's when I started digging in. And that's when I realized, and it was just embarrassing, that I had been in the healthcare industry my whole career, at least investing in it. I had no idea that the FDA banned women from participating in clinical trials until 1993. And I thought, how could I not know this, right? And then I started digging into things and realizing both how in the US, both science and medicine have approached women as small men. The standard of care for our research and our medical education is men. And the assumption is if you can treat a man and if you understand a man's biology, then you can treat a woman. You understand her biology as long as you can deliver babies, right? And I started realizing that was so wrong. And, I was wrong. And I started realizing too, if scientists and doctors have been thinking this way, I can't really fault my male venture capital friends for thinking that way, right? And the other thing too is data had come out showing that if you wanted to change capital flows to female entrepreneurs, the way it was happening, it was by females becoming venture capitalists. So firms that had a female on their venture capital investment committee, those were the ones who were willing to invest in female entrepreneurs. So I almost felt, Corinne and I felt like an obligation to start to move into venture capital because it was the only way we were going to get funds to women. And then when I started learning more about women's health, and again, my own ignorance, like I had no idea that if I were having a heart attack, I would feel tired, I'd be sweating, I'd be, nauseous. Because if that happened to me, I would think I had the flu and I would not go to an emergency room. I would stay home. And again, I was thinking, wait a minute, I should know these things. How do I not know them? And the more I started looking at it, the more I realized I've been thinking about women's health the wrong way. And that's when my partner, Tracy Dooley, who went to Stanford Medical School, she started teaching me that, autoimmune disease, 80% of the patients are women. Alzheimer's disease, 2/3 of the patients are women. And that's not because women live longer, right? You start learning, they're learning, only now are they learning that cardiovascular disease have different causes in females than in men. So we are still very much just on the cutting edge of understanding this stuff. And the great thing about it was, because I had come out of investment management, I knew my job was to make outstanding returns for my investors, right? And so I did not go into this thinking, well, I have a bleeding heart and I'm going to do the right thing. Instead, I thought healthcare in the US is a $4 trillion industry, and we have been ignoring 50% of the population. And we have not been innovating for the needs of 50% of the population. And you just sort of hit your head on, and say like, this can't be, right? How can this possibly exist in 2023? And it does. And the amazing thing is when we first started the fund, our early investors said, well, that's great, but how are you going to find any companies to invest in if you're going to look for early stage companies working to improve women's health and and or female founder in healthcare and life sciences. And the truth is, since we have spoken with over 1,200 companies in the past 4 years, entrepreneurs get it. The entrepreneurs are identifying these unmet needs, and they're going out and starting the companies to create the solutions to solve those problems. The trouble is, the capital flows have not recognized it yet. So the entrepreneurs are getting it. We just need to get more capital to these people because they're innovating and these are real needs. One thing I found when I was in life science tools is one of the Achilles heels of the Silicon Valley in general in technology is sort of the engineer's view of build it and they will come. So you build this great gee whiz technology, and then you try to figure out what to use it for, right? And so it was a technology looking for an application. What I love about healthcare, and especially women's health, all you have to ask, you have to just ask any female or any doctor who deals with females, what's something that they think needs to be better? And they can talk nonstop, right? The number of unmet needs is so huge and it's so obvious that it's a much easier way to go about thinking of what companies should be innovating and what companies we should fund, because you don't need to worry about, is there going to be a demand for the product or service? There's already a demand for it. There just isn't the solution, right? So that's one thing that makes my job really easy.
There's two things. There's demand, there's unmet needs, there's demand, and it's a business, which means you make money, and there's nothing wrong with the two meeting. I think what's really interesting to me, Linda, is these unmet needs that women founders are solving for, because guess what? They're living with the problems. They have the endometriosis. They've gone through a double mastectomy and they need to have a better experience after surgery. So when we think about that, it only makes sense that women founders will be developing the products. But it's, I think, an interesting thing to talk about is when you find these women entrepreneurs and women founders, because they're often going out and solving the very problem that they had. And there's passion behind it, or their sister had it, or their mother had it. When you think about now coming in as a founder, with Avestria, creating this VC for women's health and filling, it's a moneymaker, but talk to us about your feeling about meeting those unmet needs as an investor.
Now, I'm not exactly sure if I'm answering your question the way you want me to, but so I myself am an entrepreneur, right? And my product is an investment vehicle for generally high net worth individuals who want to invest, see the opportunity and or want to invest in women's health. And so in a certain way, I'm sort of a go-between between the investors who have the money and the entrepreneurs who need the money. And my job is to sort of figure out which entrepreneurs are maybe in the position to really succeed and what I can do to help them succeed. But one of the things I myself am struggling with is, what is the demand for my product? And I think probably anyone starting a venture capital firm, male or female, you struggle because the large institutions are very comfortable investing it, sending their money to large venture capitalists. But remember, they're going to most of them are dominated by men, and most of them are very focused on software and hardware and the internet. Anyone who wants to do something a little different, it's really hard to raise money. It's because it's different. And I think people view it as risky just by virtue of the fact that it's different. So some investors can say, wait a minute, it's different. That's the opportunity. But other investors will say, it's different. That makes me uncomfortable because I can't go back and look at 10 years of investing in women's health and see what the returns were, right? So there is a leap of faith, which is why, to be honest, most of our investors are people who actually really do understand the unmet need in women's health. So they've already sort of bought into that. And as you may know, 99% of financial assets globally and certainly in the US, are controlled by white men. And not that there's anything wrong with white men, but you're not going to get a lot of diversity of opinion if that's who is controlling 99% of the assets. So it's very hard to get the financial community to start thinking differently. But it's a long game, and I'm in it for the long haul. And to be honest, we've had entrepreneurs thank us for starting Avestria, whether or not we fund them. They just, now they have somebody they can go and talk to, and somebody who, first of all, won't get embarrassed about whatever female health issue they're talking about, right? And someone who is not going to take them any less seriously because they're a woman. Right. So right there's something that we're offering the entrepreneurs that they have such an unmet need for, right? And so we do. Some days we say, well, we're not growing as fast as we'd like, but the truth is, at least we're there. And in some ways, for the entrepreneurs, that's really helpful for them to know that that there's someone like us out there doing what we're doing.
I couldn't agree more. And thank you so much for being there. I have to say something. Just hearing this gets me so angry and incensed. When you think about if we just speak about healthcare, like the blockbuster drugs that keep getting a new indication, and whatever. There's so many Me Too products out there that are fighting to get the 100 million out of the multi-billion-dollar, pool. And here we have women's health, and we're not treating these unmet needs that exist that make half the population better, healthier, more productive in life. And, it just doesn't make sense to me. And then on the other side of your conversation, which is around, the other industries that are dominate that pool of VCs, again, not that there isn't these gee whiz technologies that come out, but there are a lot of additional, multi generations of the same sort of category. So what strikes me, and I want to say this to any investor, any woman, is to know that everything you're doing is so necessary. So it's an unmet need, and it's a first of its kind. So the opportunity in that is like tenfold. It's exponential. And in some cases, maybe it'll be the long game, maybe it'll be the not so long game, but you're onto something. And it's just so, it makes me so angry to think that that's the world we live in, that just doesn't see that. Thinking about, if that's my mother who has Alzheimer's, my mother who has a UTI and needs a certain type of thing, like a different type of depends. My wife, who could have gone through, and had breast cancer or any other sort of cancer that, could get her early detection on the next thing. Or my daughter who has period pain, which could end up being endometrial, whatever it may be, that they can't even put those glasses on and say, holy crap, that's my people, my women in my life. And so that's what doesn't make sense to me. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Okay, again, I'm very old, but when I was growing up in grammar school, they would, when we hit 5th grade and we started learning about the reproductive system, they sent all the boys to one room and all the girls to the other room, right? And hopefully they don't still do that today. But if that's the way we approach it, how as a society can we expect men to be comfortable talking about women's anatomies and women's health issues, right? And we ourselves have to be willing to talk about these things as women. And one of the things that I was really amazed by when we first started the fund and first were reaching out to potential investors and entrepreneurs is you would get a group of people together, and all of a sudden, they're all talking about endometriosis, and they have never spoken about endometriosis to anyone in public ever, right? Or that they're saying the word vagina in public for one of the few times ever. Mm-hmm. And these conversations get going, and they're incredibly normal, but we're still, I think, as a society trying to get there. And you see that the lay press is, in the past 4 years that Avestria has existed, the lay press has become so much more comfortable with talking about women's health. The New York Times Magazine had menopause as their cover a couple months ago. Like menopause, no one ever talked to me about menopause, right? It's like one of the, you just put the women on the ice floe and send them out. So like we ourselves, and as women, I think we have to be willing to have these conversations first with each other, but then also with the men in our lives.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's so interesting that you say that, Linda, because, having interviewed, I don't know, 85 women so far, representing 39 countries, I'm saying that specifically, that the one thing that is in common, and you'd think the US would be so much more progressive, but none of us are having those conversations. There's so much shame attached to talking about our anatomy, our female issues, if you will, and speaking about them. Even amongst each other. So what happens is we normalize not having the conversation. So I think that the next generation will certainly open up the ability to have and normalize that conversation. I think back to your point about having the investor community, which is male dominated, see it as a not just a savvy investment, a smart investment, because they're investing in the future of women. And so, yes, your end goal is to make returns for your investors, but at the end of the day, you're also doing something remarkably good for the world, right?
I hope so. I mean, I'm a selfish person, right? If I can improve health for myself, I'm happy, right?
And I think it's interesting when you look at it from the first person lens. Like when you are, so if you're, whether you're a caregiver or you're this person, you consume, content or things or experiences a certain way. If you can be part of the creation of that, the enabling of that, that's a pretty good feeling. It's not like you're trying to get people to invest in Bitcoin. And I'm not saying that Bitcoin is a bad investment and it might not be the future currency. Women's health is like, it's not the future, it's the now. It's been a problem for years and years and years. So it needs solutions for it. Having these conversations so you understand the value in investing in this.
I'm sort of a boring investor. Do you know, like if I think of my investment career, like I've always been the one who, really thought about like the fundamentals of the business. Is this company going to eventually make money? It's not sexy, right? It's not like talking about an internet company that isn't going to be profitable for decades, right? And that's okay. Investors are going to still give the company the money because it's sort of sexy and hot and fun to talk to at a cocktail party, right? And I'm not sure why, as investors, that should be how we make our investment decisions, right? Should we invest in companies because we think that it'll be fun to talk to it at a cocktail conversation party, right? Or should we be really thinking about the long run and how to really have impact? Facebook has had real impact, right? But I'm sure they never talk about themselves as an impact company, right? But if you're a successful company, you will impact the lives of many people, right? And I just think somehow we need to change people's mindset about, what makes for a great investment.
I like that. And in other words, when they're not dealing with challenges and struggles. So, investing in that is a wonderful thing. And it is crazy to think that, what you just suggested with, the next big thing on the internet being decades away, but they'll throw millions at it. Here's 60, go make it happen or whatever. This is a hard conversation to be having, but a necessary one. I really admire the work you're doing and the way you're doing it. And you said I'm a boring investor, but the way you've approached your investing, which is very, I don't want to say pragmatic, but you're very systematic about it, makes you a reason to invest in. That would give me confidence as an investor to come in and want to invest in your company, because you have a very thorough and systematic approach to, call it boring, but then you look at all these unmet needs and opportunities. So what's interesting is you might have the foundation that lays that in to give confidence to the investors, overlay that with something really innovative that serves the women's health. And you've got that's magic, right?
Luckily, luckily we have companies who are doing really well. We've all in fund one, we had 2 companies were acquired within 24 months of starting the fund. So our investors, we were able to return half the fund in only 2 years. And that's a lucky, right? That just usually does not happen. But, so the companies are out there and they're succeeding and they're making a difference. And it's great to be a part of it. And I try to always, in my letters to our investors, I try to always emphasize to them, like, what a difference they're making, right? Because it's, it may be my time and effort in my job, but it's their money that is enabling these products to come onto the market and change the lives of women. So, we had one investment in a company that probably in labor and delivery, the biggest cause of maternal mortality is postpartum hemorrhaging. And we invested in the company Lydia, and they have a really, really simple device that can stop postpartum hemorrhaging in like 1 minute. And it does it every time. It's incredibly reliable. And we were so excited because when they were purchased by Organon, which is a publicly traded company, they were able to start distributing this device to every country in the world, right? So it's not something that needs to be in, at UCSF in an academic hospital, right? This is a simple tool that can be used in the field, literally. So, and it is saving women's lives. So I try to remind my investors of that it's great that they made the money, but what they're doing really matters.
For me, that would be a wonderful conversation because the duality of doing good and making money at the same time, nothing wrong with that. I think that's amazing. So Linda, I'm going to take you down a slightly different direction as we're beginning to finish the conversation. And one would be like, as a woman in this industry, how are you feeling today?
This is the first job I've ever had that I love. And, I have challenges every day. And, I have nobody to yell at but myself because I don't really have a boss. So I'm very motivated. It's wonderful to have a job where you feel like you're making a difference. You're not just a cog in a wheel. And, what you say and do has impact, and hopefully in a very positive way. So that part is wonderful. And to finally be doing something that, it was great working on the sequencing of the human genome. That was very exciting, but this is so close to my heart. And again, I think what's amazing, I think, about healthcare in general and entrepreneurs in healthcare is, you're right, they have usually experienced something in their life that was not the same as going on a luxury cruise, right? It was a healthcare issue, which probably involved fear and risk and hope. And that's what drives these entrepreneurs, right? And every business, again, has ups and downs, but these entrepreneurs are really sticking with it because it means something to them. And that's one thing I would encourage every person, if they can in their career, is to start, as you change jobs or you think about jobs, do think about what matters to you, because if what you're doing doesn't matter, it's really hard to get up every day, and life is short, surprisingly. And, so if you can do something you genuinely care about, and to always work with people who you genuinely admire and respect, that's really important too.
Next questions are, I think, a good build on to that, but I think you kind of gave a great message. Is today, this is your platform to speak to women around the world. So inside the investment community, outside the investment community, and women of all backgrounds, cultures, ages 18 to 100. What do you want to tell this generation today, this next generation, all the generations? Like, what's your message, Linda, to women?
I'm just so hopeful for the current generation. I am such a dinosaur, and I went through things, and it's luckily they are different people than I was at their age, right? They're amazing. They're strong and they're athletic and they're smart and they speak their minds, right? And they're, they form their families the way they choose to form their families. And, so that just makes me so hopeful, because, I certainly didn't feel that level of creativity, and I don't think there was that much creativity around me. And, not only do I believe that a woman can do anything a man can do, I genuinely believe that women in so many ways biologically are equipped to be capable of doing so much more. When the opportunity to lead comes up, right, you have to take it. Do you know? Because that's the other thing that, people always say, well, women need a seat at the table. And when you hear these stories about the fact that a heart valve gets designed and, oh, it fits a man, that's because there wasn't a woman sitting at the table, right? And so that's why I think women have to sit at the table and they have to voice their concerns, because if they don't, they're sort of letting the rest of us down, right? Because our needs may be very much the same as their needs. Even if you're working somewhere where, you have to be very careful about how you speak your mind and what you say, it matters. It matters a lot. And also don't be hard on yourself. I think as women, our expectations for ourselves are just crazy. And there's one part in the Barbie movie where America Ferrera is talking about the expectations in our world for a woman has to be tough, but not too tough, and has to lead, but not offend anybody. And it's not easy being a woman. I'm sure it's not easy being a man either. I mean, acknowledge that for ourselves. Be kind to ourselves. When we need the time, take the time to yourself, and and it's okay if you look at your male peers and they're achieving something different than you're achieving. That's okay, right? It doesn't mean you failed. It means you're on your own track, and and you just keep focusing on yourself and what matters to you. Because I can tell you, in my business school class, if we think about financial success, or we think about success in terms of big titles at big corporations, the men have run circles around the women. Hopefully that's no longer going to be the case. Hopefully some of those more traditional measures of success are now more open to women. But again, everybody has to run their own race, and you just got to stick with it. And it's not easy.
I love that. Thank you so much. There's only one thing I want to add to it, is when you get the seat at the table, that discussion around the seat at the table. And I think this is a message that all women should hear, is when you get that seat at the table, you find that seat at the table, you fight for that seat at the table, and you bring another woman to the seat at the table. And I'll tell you why. When you bring another, that means there's 200%. And so that really is about understanding the power you have and the voice you have at the seat of the table, and making sure that you bring as many women to that table as you can. What a wonderful conversation. I'm so much education around the financial, and just your experience, Linda, has been so interesting and humbling. And I really admire the work you're doing. And I'm really grateful that you and the other founders have founded Avestria and are serving the women's health community and making sure these products come to market. Thank you so much for today's conversation and for being so open and generous with your story.
No, well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for engaging with me and being interested in my life and my path and our company. So it's really kind of you.
And I'm so grateful and honored to have the privilege to talk to you. Thank you, Linda. Thanks for listening to Under the Sisterhood. If you haven't already, please give us a quick rating and review on Apple or Spotify. And make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter so you can hear from more amazing women. This podcast is created and hosted by Under the Sisterhood, LLC, and Elizabeth Elfenbein, produced by Elizabeth Elfenbein and Zach Slaff, and edited by Zach Slaff. The music is by Ayla Schaefer, her song, Rose.